If Russia were to find this factory tomorrow, it would try to destroy it before dawn. Not because it's just an industrial plant, not because it's just a military investment, and not because it produces steel, but because buried underground, protected by concrete, silence, and secrecy, this facility represents something far more dangerous to the Kremlin. The exact moment when Ukraine stops depending on others to keep fighting. In this war, it's not enough to have brave soldiers. It's not enough to have drones. It's not enough to have tanks. In the end, everything comes down to one brutal question. Who can keep firing when the other side no longer can? And that's where a number comes in. One that today decides life and death in Eastern Europe. 155 millimeters. That's the standard NATO artillery shell diameter, a cylinder of steel, explosive power and precision that, upon impact, doesn't just destroy positions. It breaks offensives, halts armored columns, and reshapes entire front lines. A single shot can decide a trench, 100, a city, thousands, an entire military campaign. But there's a problem. For much of the large-scale invasion, Ukraine has been fighting this war with an open wound that few fully understood. It was firing faster than the West could produce. While frontline images filled headlines, a silent crisis was unfolding in the shadows. A crisis less visible than a missile, less spectacular than a burning tank, but just as lethal. The ammunition crisis. Because modern war is not won only on the battlefield. It's won in factories, in furnaces, on production lines, in warehouses, in convoys, in the time it takes for a shell to go from blueprint to barrel. And there, during critical months, Ukraine was dangerously exposed. Its artillery crews in Donbass watched in frustration as they were forced to ration fire. Every shell counted. Every volley had to be justified. Every target had to be worth the cost. Meanwhile, on the other side, Russia kept hammering positions with a brutal logic of attrition. More fire, more volume, more pressure, more time. That difference wasn't psychological, it was industrial. Because a nation that doesn't control its own ammunition production doesn't fully control its ability to resist. And a nation that doesn't control its ability to resist doesn't control its destiny. That was one of the harshest lessons of this war. And from that lesson comes one of the boldest, riskiest, and most symbolic projects in Europe today. Building a massive 155mm shell factory on Ukrainian soil, while under enemy fire. Think about that for a second. Not in Germany, not in Poland, not in France, not in a safe zone far from the front, in Ukraine, in a country under missile strikes, kamikaze drones, sabotage, satellite surveillance, and constant threats. To many analysts, it sounded almost irrational. An industrial suicide, a monumental provocation, a perfect target, and yet they moved forward. In February 2024, an alliance was formalized that changed the game. On one side, Rheinmetall, the German defense giant. On the other, Ukraine's state corporation, Ukroboronprom. What was announced wasn't a simple technical cooperation. It wasn't a repair shop. It wasn't a secondary maintenance line. It was something far more serious. The creation of a structure capable of producing hundreds of thousands of artillery shells on Ukrainian territory. That means independence. That means resilience. That means the flow of fire can continue even if foreign aid is delayed, debated, or politically blocked. And here's the key point. In a war of attrition, self-sufficiency is not an advantage. It's survival. Rheinmetall set a massive goal, 300,000 shells per year. Pause there. 300,000. That's not a decorative figure for a press release. It's a strategic statement. It's a signal to Moscow. It's a warning to anyone who still believes Ukraine survives only on loans, promises, and aid packages. Because if that capacity holds, Ukraine stops being just a recipient of weapons and starts becoming a direct producer of its own firepower. And that changes the entire equation. Now, there's an inevitable question. How do you build a factory of this magnitude without turning it into an immediate target? Because Russia doesn't need to see it inaugurated to strike it. It just needs to sense it, detect movement, identify anomalies, thermal signatures, logistics routes, construction patterns. That's why this plant isn't conceived as a conventional industrial facility. It's conceived as a production fortress, a blend of civil engineering, military design, and strategic survival. Large sections are designed under a semi-underground model, not for aesthetics, not for energy efficiency, not just for discretion, for protection. Because in modern warfare, anything visible is an invitation to be hit, and any single point of failure is a death sentence, so the design follows a simple logic. Bury, harden, segment, duplicate, isolate. Bury to reduce exposure. Harden to withstand impact. Segment to prevent total collapse. Duplicate to keep operating if one module falls. Isolate to ensure one strike doesn't shut down the entire plant. That means meters of reinforced concrete, reinforced blast doors, separated sections, independent ventilation, autonomous circuits, production lines that can continue even if part of the facility is damaged. The idea is both terrifying and brilliant. If the enemy hits one part, the factory doesn't die. It bleeds, but it keeps running. And building something like this, in wartime, is itself almost a military operation. Work crews don't operate like on a normal construction site. They move under stealth protocols. Thermal signatures are minimized. Night schedules are prioritized. Excavated earth is managed not just for foundations, but for concealment. Every movement, every convoy, every delivery, every piece of machinery must be handled as if the enemy is watching. Because it probably is. And inside that protected structure, this isn't just any equipment. We're talking about high-demand machinery, heavy metallurgical technology, massive hydraulic presses, heat treatment processes, extreme quality control, and zero-error standards. Because manufacturing a 155mm shell is not the same as producing a steel tube. It's producing something that must survive extreme violence. At the moment of firing, inside the barrel, pressures are immense, accelerations are extreme, tolerances are minimal, and the margin for failure is almost non-existent. If the shell isn't perfectly symmetrical, its trajectory can drift. If the steel contains impurities, it can fracture. If there's an invisible micro-crack, it can fail at the worst possible moment. And if it fails inside the barrel, you don't just lose ammunition, you destroy the artillery piece and kill the crew. That's why this war is also fought in microns, in exact temperatures, in chemical composition, in metal hardness, in deformation control, and in geometric precision. And that technical detail matters more than it seems, because many people imagine industrial war as pure quantity, tons rolling off production lines, mass output. But modern artillery demands something more sophisticated, quantity with reliability. Producing a lot is useless if it detonates poorly, flies inaccurately, or fails under stress. Stockpiling defective shells is useless. Pretending capacity is useless if your ammunition betrays the operator. So the manufacturing process becomes almost a scientific discipline of war. First, the special steel must be precisely treated. Strong but not brittle. Hard but not fragile. Capable of withstanding launch and performing correctly on impact. Then come forging and machining. Then non-destructive testing. Ultrasound. Internal inspection. High sensitivity scanning. Microscopic flaw detection. Only after passing that brutal filter does the shell move to the next phase, the charge. And that opens another dimension. Steel matters, but explosives and propellants are just as critical. even more so in strained, monitored global supply chains. Essential raw materials, delicate compounds, sensitive processes, extreme safety controls. This is no longer just metallurgy, it's war chemistry. Nitrocellulose, energetic compounds, propellants, internal charges, precise integration, massive operational risks. An error here doesn't slow a line, it destroys it. That's why the real value of this project isn't just assembling parts, it's moving toward full autonomy, not relying only on empty casings or imported components, not waiting for every link in the chain to come from abroad. Because heavy external dependence in a war of this scale means putting your breathing under someone else's political control. Ukraine understood that. It also understood something else. Logistics kills. It doesn't sound epic, it doesn't sound heroic, it doesn't make headlines, but it's true. Logistics kills. A detected convoy can ruin an offensive, a damaged bridge can empty a battery, a long route can render a reserve useless. A delay of days can cost a position that takes months to regain. That's why producing inside Ukraine changes the logistics equation entirely. Shorter distances, lower exposure, fewer vulnerable nodes, fewer kilometers from factory to front. And in a war where drones hunt depots and track movement obsessively, shortening the supply chain is almost as important as increasing output. Less road, less time, less risk, more responsiveness. That means urgent needs can be met far faster. And at the front, that time difference can mean everything. Hold or collapse, retreat or resist, lose a line, or crush the enemy advance before it matures. Yet even all of this, steel, design, armor, chemistry, logistics, pales next to the most valuable factor, the human one. Because a factory runs on people, technicians, operators, engineers, maintenance crews, quality control, safety teams. People who, in another life, might have worked in civilian sectors, now becoming the backbone of a modern defense industry. And that builds something beyond production. Industrial memory, national capability, strategic future. Ukraine wouldn't just be making shells, it would be building sovereignty under fire. And for Russia, that's a nightmare. Because the Kremlin understands exactly what this means. If Ukraine sustains protected domestic production, Russia's attrition strategy weakens. One of Moscow's key advantages, volume of fire, loses its edge. That's why threats, disinformation, sabotage, and espionage surround this project. Destroying a battalion matters. Destroying a factory is strategic. But destroying one designed to survive is far harder. And that's the point. Make it costly to destroy, and keep it alive even when hit. History is full of brave nations that fell not from lack of courage, but from lack of industry. Morale can last months, but if production breaks, the front pays. And now, something symbolic emerges. German industrial power meets Ukrainian urgency to build a machine of resistance, not the language of diplomacy, the language of sustained fire. And this is where it becomes deeply symbolic. This factory isn't just production. It's transformation. From dependence to capability. From waiting to building. That shift may matter more than the first shell produced. Because when a country decides to produce, even under threat, it's saying something final. It doesn't intend to disappear. Not to run out. Not to surrender. Not to beg forever. It intends to resist. To learn, to scale, to survive. And that message doesn't go only to Moscow, it goes to all of Europe. If successful, Ukraine won't just be a shield, it becomes a central military actor. That doesn't happen overnight. It happens in silence, with concrete, with training, with night shifts, with fear, with discipline, with molten steel. Production may formally begin in 2026. Because wars of attrition aren't decided only by who hits harder, but by who can keep producing when everyone thinks they can't. And Ukraine seems to understand that with brutal clarity. In this phase of the conflict, production isn't economic. It isn't just military. It's the ultimate act of resistance. Every ton of steel, every assembly line, every trained operator, every reinforced module, every finished shell, they all say the same thing. The war is no longer fought only in trenches. It's also fought underground, in hidden plants, in protected factories, where the noise isn't propaganda, but production. The war of factories has already begun, and if this plant delivers what it promises, the sound coming out of it won't just be artillery. It will be the sound of a nation refusing, with its own industry and firepower, to be erased. La guerra de las fábricas ya comenzó, y si esta planta cumple lo que promete, entonces el estruendo que saldrá de allí no será solo el de la artillería, será el sonido de una nación negándose, con industria y fuego propio, a ser borrada del mapa.